History often has a way of burying its most uncomfortable paradoxes under layers of nostalgia and corporate branding. When we think of the 1930s and 1940s, the mental images are usually stark and divided. On one side, the horrific machinery of the Nazi regime. On the other, the symbols of the free world that would eventually rise to defeat it. Among those symbols, few are as quintessentially American as the contoured glass bottle of Coca-Cola. It is the liquid embodiment of capitalism, freedom, and the American dream. Yet there exists a chapter in the brand's history that disrupts this clean binary. A chapter that many would prefer to leave unopened. This is the sweet secret of the Third Reich. Imagine for a moment a grey, imposing afternoon in Berlin. The year is somewhere in the turbulent mid-30s. The streets are alive with the rhythmic, terrifying thud of jackboots striking cobblestones. Columns of the Hitler Youth, faces flushed with ideological fervour, march in precise formation, their banners snapping in the wind. And right there, driving alongside these columns of future soldiers, are delivery trucks painted in bright, cheerful colours, emblazoned with the unmistakable cursive logo of Coca-Cola. It seems like a hallucination, a glitch in the historical matrix, yet it was the reality of the day. The visual dissonance does not end on the streets. Archives suggest scenes that would make a modern public relations manager pale with anxiety. There are accounts of Hermann Göring, the formidable and ruthless second in command of the Reich, standing before flashing cameras at social events. In his hand, he does not hold a traditional stein of German beer or a crystal glass of schnapps, but a bottle of American Coca-Cola, offering a smile that endorsed the beverage as a drink fit for the elite of the new Germany. Even more unsettling are the whispers that reach the highest levels of the Chancellery. It is a well-known historical fact that Adolf Hitler was a teetotaler, strictly avoiding alcohol to maintain his image of ascetic discipline. However, persistent rumors and lesser-known historical footnotes suggest that the Führer found his caffeine fix elsewhere. It is alleged that Hitler himself regularly drank Coca-Cola, sipping the dark, sugary brew in the privacy of his offices while plotting the domination of Europe. Whether a guilty pleasure or a simple preference, the image of the dictator holding the symbol of America is a profound irony that sets the stage for one of the strangest corporate stories of the 20th century. But how did this happen? How did an American icon become a staple of Nazi Germany? To understand this, we must rewind the clock to the twilight years of the Weimar Republic, before the swastika fully eclipsed the sun. The beginning of the empire, 1929-1933. The story does not begin with political maneuvering, but with the ambition of one man, Ray Powers, an American expatriate with a vision as effervescent as the product he sold. Powers arrived in Germany with a daunting mission. It was 1929, a year synonymous with economic collapse. Yet Powers was determined to bottle and sell the American spirit to a German populace that was culturally wedded to beer and deeply suspicious of foreign novelties. When Powers began bottling Coca-Cola in Germany, the operation was modest, almost insignificant. The German palate was unaccustomed to the cold, carbonated, sugary rush of the drink. In those early days, the empire was nothing more than a few trucks and a relentless drive to succeed. The sales figures from that first year reflected the struggle. A mere 6,000 cases were sold. To the corporate overlords back in the United States, Germany was a blip on the radar, a market with potential but little performance. However, Powers was not a man to accept defeat. Between 1929 and 1933, as the political climate in Germany began to boil and the Weimar Republic crumbled under the weight of hyperinflation and street violence, Powers worked tirelessly. He pushed the brand into cafes, restaurants, and events. He marketed Coca-Cola not just as a drink, but as a revitalizing tonic for a weary nation. The results of his labor were nothing short of miraculous. By 1933, the year the world changed forever with Adolf Hitler's ascension to the chancellery, Coca-Cola's German operations had exploded. Sales had skyrocketed from those initial 6,000 cases to a staggering 100,000 cases per year. The red and white logo was becoming a familiar sight in German cities, a splash of color against the darkening political horizon. The American drink was no longer an outsider. It was becoming a part of daily German life. Yet this period of explosive growth concealed a dark and dangerous paradox. On paper, the sales charts showed a trajectory of triumph. The volume of Coca-Cola flowing through Germany suggested a booming business. But behind the scenes, the financial reality was catastrophic. Despite the soaring popularity of the drink among the German people, the subsidiary was bleeding money. The costs of expansion, the chaotic economic environment of the Depression era, and perhaps mismanagement had pushed the German branch of Coca-Cola to the very brink of bankruptcy. It was a cruel irony. At the precise moment of the Nazis' political triumph, the American company that would soon become their favorite thirst quencher was facing ruin. Ray Powers had built the foundation, hooked the German consumer, and established the supply lines, but the financial structure was collapsing. The branch was drowning in debt, just as the demand was reaching its peak. The year 1933 stood as a precipice. The National Socialists were consolidating power, turning the country into a totalitarian state. The business environment was becoming treacherous for foreign companies. Ray Powers had taken the company as far as he could, achieving a sales miracle while overseeing a financial disaster. The stage was set for a dramatic shift. The German branch of Coca-Cola needed more than just an ambitious American salesman. It needed a savior who could navigate the treacherous political waters of the Third Reich and turn popularity into profit. It needed someone who could dance with the devil without getting burned. The empire was built, the thirst was created, but the coffers were empty. And in the shadows of this looming bankruptcy, a new figure was waiting to step into the light. A man whose ambition would rival the regime itself and who would change everything for the brand. But that is a story for the next chapter. Max Keith. Savior or collaborator? 1933, 1936. With the American expatriate, Ray Powers leaving behind a legacy of high sales but disastrous finances, Coca-Cola GmbH stood at a crossroads. The year was 1933, a time when the very air in Germany seemed charged with static electricity, signaling the coming storm of the Third Reich. The subsidiary needed more than just a salesman. It needed a commander. Enter Max Keith, a man whose imposing physical presence was matched only by his formidable business acumen. Keith was not an outsider. He was a German manager through and through, possessing an intuitive understanding of the shifting cultural and political tides of his homeland. When he took the helm of Coca-Cola GmbH in 1933, the company was teetering on the edge of the abyss, bleeding money despite its growing popularity. Keith's first order of business was a brutal but necessary reorganization of the finances. He approached the ledgers with the precision of a surgeon, cutting waste and restructuring the operational costs until the subsidiary was pulled back from the brink of bankruptcy. Under his iron grip, the chaotic growth of the powers era was transformed into a disciplined, profitable machine. But financial restructuring was only half the battle. The real challenge lay in navigating the treacherous waters of National Socialism. As the swastika rose over Berlin, foreign companies, especially those symbolizing American capitalism, were viewed with suspicion. Keith realized that for Coca-Cola to survive, it could not simply be a refreshing drink imported from the United States. It had to become part of the fabric of the new Germany. This marked the beginning of a controversial era where business strategy and political collaboration blurred into an indistinguishable gray zone. Keith made a calculated decision to associate the brand with the energy, youth, and dynamism that the Nazi regime so aggressively promoted. He didn't shy away from the new masters of Germany. He courted them. The depth of this integration is best illustrated by a scene that seems almost satirical in hindsight, but was starkly real at the time. Picture the grand opening of a new Coca-Cola bottling plant during these early years. The hall is draped in the red, white, and black banners of the Reich. Uniformed SS officers and high-ranking party officials mingle with corporate executives. The atmosphere is celebratory. But when the time comes for the toast, the crystal flutes of French champagne are absent. Instead, the Nazi elite, with smiles of approval, raise the iconic contoured glass bottles of Coca-Cola. In this surreal moment, the American soda is not a symbol of foreign influence, but a celebrated guest at the table of fascism, validated by the very men who are dismantling democracy. Keith's strategy reached its zenith during the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin. This was not merely a sporting event. It was Hitler's grand propaganda show designed to present the Third Reich as a benevolent, civilized, and powerful superstate. While the world debated boycotts and Jesse Owens prepared to shatter Aryan myths on the track, Max Keith saw a golden opportunity. He ensured that Coca-Cola was ubiquitous at the Games. The company flooded the venues with the drink, setting up bottling machinery and distribution points that put a Coke in the hand of spectators and officials alike. By supplying the beverage to the 1936 Olympics, Keith effectively wove the brand into the spectacle of the Nazi pageant. For the millions of Germans and international visitors attending, Coca-Cola was there, refreshing the masses as they watched the choreographed prowess of the regime. However, behind this aggressive expansion lies a detail that complicates the narrative of Max Keith. Despite his willingness to rub shoulders with the elite of the Third Reich and his enthusiastic participation in their events, a curious fact remains. Keith was never a member of the NSDAP, the Nazi Party. This detail is often cited by defenders as proof of his neutrality, but history suggests a more complex reality. Keith was not an ideologue driven by racial hatred or political fanaticism. He was a pragmatist of the highest order. He did not join the party, perhaps to maintain a veneer of corporate independence, or perhaps simply because he didn't need to. He actively collaborated not out of loyalty to Hitler, but out of loyalty to the bottom line. For Keith, the Nazi regime was not a moral abomination to be resisted, but a market condition to be adapted to. By the end of 1936, Max Keith had answered the question of his role. To the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta, he was the savior who had rescued their German branch from ruin. To the observer of history, however, he appears as something far more unsettling, a man who proved that commerce has no conscience and who was willing to turn an American icon into a favored companion of a totalitarian state. The business was safe, but the moral cost was only just beginning to mount. The Kosher Scandal of 1937. By 1937, Max Keith had seemingly performed the impossible. He had pulled Coca-Cola GmbH from the brink of bankruptcy and seamlessly integrated an American icon into the pageantry of the Nazi state. However, in the paranoid and racially obsessed atmosphere of the Third Reich, success was a fragile construct. One slip, one rumor, or one wrong association could bring the entire enterprise crashing down. That year, the threat did not come from a balance sheet, but from a bottle cap. The crisis began with a detail so small it would have been trivial anywhere else in the world. It surfaced that certain Coca-Cola bottle caps, specifically those on products produced for Jewish communities in the United States, bore Hebrew characters indicating they were kosher. When news of these labels crossed the Atlantic and reached the hands of rival German beverage makers, it was weaponized with devastating efficiency. For the German brewing industry, which had watched with jealousy as caffeine-containing lemonade ate into their market share, this was the ammunition they had been waiting for. A smear campaign erupted with the ferocity of a wildfire. Pamphlets and whispers spread through the beer halls and party offices. Coca-Cola was not an innocent refreshment. It was a Jewish-American plot. The rumors claimed the company was owned by a secret Jewish trust and that the profits were being used to undermine the Aryan spirit. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. In a regime where racial purity was the highest law, the accusation of having Jewish connections was a commercial death sentence. Sales, which had been climbing steadily, suddenly plummeted. The stigma was so toxic that loyal customers began to turn away, fearing that drinking a Coke was now an act of betrayal against the fatherland. The situation escalated to the very heart of the regime, the headquarters of the Nazi Party, which had previously stocked the drink for its functionaries, abruptly cancelled all its orders. The message was clear. Coca-Cola was persona non grata. The brand was being purged. Max Keith found himself in the middle of a corporate nightmare. The savior of the company was watching his empire crumble under the weight of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. He realized that silence would be interpreted as guilt. To save the business, he had to fight the ideology on its own terms, a morally compromising necessity that defines this dark chapter. Keith launched an aggressive counteroffensive in the Nazi press. He didn't appeal to reason or tolerance. Instead, he appealed to the prejudices of the time. He publicly and vociferously refuted the rumors, issuing statements that denied any Jewish ownership or influence within the company. He worked tirelessly to rebrand Coca-Cola, not as an international product, but as a business run by Germans for Germans. This episode serves as a chilling case study of commerce under totalitarianism. It reveals how the virulent anti-Semitism of the era didn't just destroy lives, it warped the very nature of the marketplace. Corporations were forced to undergo ideological purity tests. It wasn't enough to have a good product. The product had to be Aryan. The Kosher Scandal of 1937 forced the company to strip away any association that the Nazis deemed non-Aryan. It was a desperate survival dance. Keith managed to weather the storm, eventually convincing the public and the party that the rumors were enemy propaganda. But the victory came at a cost. The scandal cemented the reality that to do business in Hitler's Germany, one had to do more than just follow the laws. One had to actively participate in the regime's worldview. Coca-Cola survived the purge, but the innocence of the brand was irrevocably lost in the process. Triumph and expansion. 1937, 1939. Having weathered the storm of the Kosher Scandal and successfully purged the brand of its perceived non-Aryan associations, Max Keith did not merely stabilize the company, he launched it into an era of unprecedented dominance. The years between 1937 and 1939 marked the zenith of Coca-Cola's success in Nazi Germany, a period where the American soft drink and the German totalitarian state seemed to move in a disturbing, symbiotic rhythm. The rehabilitation of the brand was cemented in the public eye during the Great Industrial Exhibition of 1937 in Dusseldorf. The event was a showcase of German prowess and efficiency, designed to dazzle the world. Amidst the displays of heavy machinery and nationalistic propaganda, Coca-Cola GmbH constructed a fully functional mini-plant. It was a marvel of modern engineering, bottling the dark liquid right before the eyes of fascinated spectators. The crowning moment of this PR masterstroke occurred when Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe and the second most powerful man in the Reich, visited the stand. In a scene that effectively erased any lingering doubts from the scandal of the previous months, Göring was photographed pausing at the exhibit. With the flashes of cameras capturing the moment for posterity, he enjoyed a cold Coca-Cola, visibly impressed by the operation. The message was unmistakable. If the drink was good enough for Göring, it was good enough for every loyal German. The endorsement was unofficial, but its impact was absolute. By 1939, the transformation was complete. Coca-Cola had established undisputed hegemony over the German soft drink market. The red trucks were everywhere, and the sales figures were breaking records that Ray Powers could have only dreamed of. But for Max Keith, Germany was becoming too small. As the ambitions of the Nazi regime expanded beyond its borders, so too did the ambitions of Coca-Cola GmbH. The political aggressions of the Third Reich were viewed through a strictly corporate lens. When German troops marched into Austria in 1938 for the Anschluss, merging the two nations, Keith did not see a geopolitical crisis or a violation of sovereignty. He saw a market opening. In internal communications, he celebrated the annexation of Austria, not as a political event, but as a historical success for the company. The absorption of a sovereign nation was reduced to a bullet point in a sales report, a new territory ripe for distribution. This marked the beginning of a chilling pattern. As the Wehrmacht prepared to redraw the map of Europe, Max Keith positioned himself and his product as the commercial vanguard of the conquest. Wherever the German army went, Coca-Cola planned to follow. Keith appointed himself the administrator of Coca-Cola properties in the occupied territories, ready to reorganize and profit from the chaos of war. Imagine a map of Europe from this era. Usually, we picture it covered in swastikas, marking the spread of Nazi tyranny. But in the offices of Coca-Cola GmbH, the map told a different story. It was a map where the territories of conquest were marked with little glass bottles. From the annexed streets of Vienna to the threatened borders of the East, the expansion of the Third Reich and the expansion of the Coca-Cola franchise became virtually indistinguishable. The soldiers brought the guns, and Keith brought the refreshment. The empire was growing, and business had never been better. The birth of Fanta from the ruins of war, 1940, 1944. As the 1930s bled into the 1940s, the illusion of business as usual finally shattered. The outbreak of World War II severed the transatlantic lifelines that Max Keith had relied upon. With America's entry into the conflict, the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta could no longer ship the vital, secret flavoring syrup to a hostile nation. The supply chain was cut. For any other business, this would have been the end. The factories should have fallen silent, the trucks should have been parked, and the company should have dissolved into the grey misery of the war economy. But Max Keith was not a man to accept the inevitable. Faced with the impossibility of producing the flagship American cola, Keith decided to invent a German alternative. The result was a beverage born not of inspiration, but of desperation. In 1940, and continuing through the darkest years of the war, Keith's team began experimenting with whatever ingredients they could scavenge within the blockaded Reich. The drink they created bore little resemblance to the bright orange soda we know today. It was a Frankenstein of a beverage, a muddy, yellowish-brown liquid cobbled together from the scraps of the food industry. The recipe was a testament to scarcity. It relied heavily on apple pomace, the fibrous, mushy leftovers from cider presses, and whey, the watery byproduct of cheese curdling. It was sweetened with whatever was available, often beet sugar or saccharin. It was an ersatz product in the truest sense of the word, a fruit-flavored surrogate designed to trick the palate of a population that was slowly forgetting the taste of luxury. They named it Fanta, derived from the German word fantasy, imagination, because it took a leap of imagination to taste fruit in the peculiar mixture. Yet, despite its humble and somewhat unappetizing origins, the drink became a phenomenon. By 1943, as the tide of war turned against Germany and the cities began to crumble under Allied bombing campaigns, Fanta was flowing in rivers. Production was maintained in increasingly improvised conditions. As established factories were reduced to rubble, bottling lines were moved to makeshift workshops. Here lies one of the grimmest details of the Fanta story. The production was not merely a feat of logistical genius. It was fueled by the machinery of human suffering. Historical records indicate that as the German workforce was drained by the military draft, these bottling plants utilized forced labor to keep the conveyor belts moving. The refreshing drink of the Reich was bottled by hands that had no choice. Paradoxically, Fanta became a symbol of national pride and resilience in a besieged nation. It was everywhere. Housewives, unable to find sugar for baking, bought Fanta by the case to use as a sweetener for cakes and stews. It was drunk by the exhausted workers in munitions factories and by the party elite in their bunkers. In the midst of total war, while the cities burned and the front lines collapsed, Max Keith managed to sell millions of cases of this muddy surrogate. Fanta became the unofficial drink of the home front, a strange point of stability in a world that was falling apart. It was the taste of survival, a sweet, strange brew created from the ruins, destined to outlive the regime that birthed it. After the collapse, 1945, present. As the dust settled over the ruins of the Third Reich in 1945, the landscape of Europe was unrecognizable. Cities lay in rubble. Economies were in tatters. and the architects of the Nazi regime faced justice or oblivion. Amidst this profound devastation, an unlikely figure was discovered diligently working in a damaged bottling plant, Max Keith. When American troops arrived at the shattered remains of a Coca-Cola facility, they found Keith, the man who had transformed an American franchise into a cornerstone of the Nazi economy, overseeing the production of Fanta. It was a surreal tableau, the conquerors encountering the vanquished collaborator amidst the detritus of war, still engaged in the business of bottling the very drink that had sustained the regime. Remarkably, Keith was not arrested or prosecuted for his role. Instead, the Americans recognized the continuity of the business. Coca-Cola GmbH, though severely damaged, was still a functioning entity. Keith, the pragmatist who had navigated the Nazi era, was allowed to remain in his post. He continued to lead the German operations, rebuilding and reorganizing until the 1950s. His tenure, spanning over 2 decades, saw him guide the company through the radical transformation from a Nazi-era enterprise to a post-war business, ready to re-engage with its American parent. The fate of Fanta was equally dramatic. While the drink had been born of wartime necessity and had served as a desperate surrogate in Germany, it was not immediately recognized as a global asset by the Coca-Cola Company. For years after the war, Fanta languished in relative obscurity, a relic of the German subsidiary's wartime ingenuity. However, the 1950s saw a resurgence of interest. The Coca-Cola Company, recognizing the potential of a distinct fruit-flavored offering, acquired the rights to Fanta and began a global marketing campaign. This relaunch presented a clean slate for the brand. Fanta, the drink that had once been served to Hermann Goering and bottled by forced labor, was reborn as a vibrant, fun-loving beverage for the post-war youth culture. The orange soda became an international hit, its history conveniently overlooked by corporate marketing. The story of its creation in the heart of the Third Reich was a detail the company preferred to keep buried deep within its archives, a footnote to be avoided. In the modern era, Coca-Cola has made sporadic attempts to address its past. The company acknowledges its wartime operations in Germany, but often frames them as a story of resilience and survival under duress, rather than one of active collaboration. The narrative generally emphasizes how the company struggled to operate under the constraints of the Nazi regime. However, the ghost of the past refused to remain entirely quiet. In 2015, Coca-Cola faced significant backlash after running a series of advertisements that seemed to celebrate the good old days in Germany during the Nazi era, highlighting the positive contributions of the company at that time, without explicitly condemning the regime. The ads, which featured archival footage and portrayed a seemingly prosperous Germany with Coca-Cola present, evoked painful memories and were widely criticized for downplaying or sanitizing the historical context. In response to the outcry, Coca-Cola issued an apology, stating that the advertising campaign was a mistake and that the company did not intend to glorify the Nazi period. They reiterated their commitment to acknowledging and learning from their history. The journey of Coca-Cola through the Third Reich, from its initial establishment to the invention of Fanta and its post-war revival, is a complex and often uncomfortable narrative. It is a stark reminder that corporations, driven by profit, can adapt to and even thrive within the most abhorrent political systems. the presence of Coca-Cola trucks alongside Hitler youth parades, the association of its products with Nazi leaders, and the very existence of Fanta born from wartime scarcity and forced labor are not easily erased. While the swastika-adorned bottles are indeed fabricated myths, the underlying reality of the brand's deep entanglement with Nazi Germany is a truth that the company and the world can no longer afford to ignore. The bright orange of Fanta today stands in sharp contrast to the dark shadows of its origin, a poignant reminder of history's enduring lessons. In the digital age, where history is often compressed into memes and sensational headlines, the story of Coca-Cola and the Third Reich has become a magnet for fabrication. A quick internet search will inevitably yield grainy, black and white photographs of glass bottles stamped with the swastika, or advertisements featuring Adolf Hitler endorsing the American soft drink. It is crucial to state the facts clearly. These images are fakes. They are modern Photoshop creations or misinterpretations of history. Coca-Cola never placed the Nazi Party symbol on its packaging, nor did the Führer ever appear in their official marketing. However, the dismissal of these myths should not offer comfort. If anything, the reality is far more unsettling than the crude inventions of conspiracy theorists. The story of Coca-Cola in Nazi Germany is not a tale of a secret ideological alliance or a sinister cult. It is not a story of monsters. It is a story of businessmen. The truth revealed in the archives is that of corporate adaptability carried to its absolute, immoral extreme. Max Keith and the executives in Atlanta did not support the Holocaust or the war of aggression. They simply chose to ignore them in favor of the balance sheet. The shocking truth is that for a multinational corporation, the nature of the regime, whether democratic or totalitarian, was irrelevant as long as the market remained open. The survival of the brand was not due to a grand conspiracy, but due to the cold logic of capitalism. When the regime demanded a German product, they created one. When the war cut off supplies, they invented Fanta. When the bombs fell, they kept bottling. It is a masterclass in resilience, stripped of all ethical considerations. As we look back at this chapter, we are left with a lingering discomfort. The history of Coca-Cola in the Third Reich serves as a mirror reflecting the dangerous capacity of commerce to normalize the abnormal. By ensuring that the people of Nazi Germany could still enjoy a cold soda while the world burned, the company provided a veneer of normalcy to a monstrous era. Epilogue. Picture a table in a modern, sunlit cafe. In the center stands a bottle of Fanta, its bright orange liquid glowing in the light, condensation beading on the plastic, a symbol of innocent, global fun. But let the camera pull back, and the background shifts. The sunlight fades into the grey grain of archival footage. Behind that cheerful bottle, the ghostly outlines of 1940s rubble emerge. We see the shadowy figures of forced laborers in a makeshift factory and the smiling face of a Luftwaffe pilot holding a similar bottle. The orange soda remains, a sweet legacy of a bitter time. The brand has moved on, and the world has changed, but the history remains trapped in the amber of that artificial flavor, a reminder that even the most innocent everyday objects can cast very long and very dark shadows.